Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Siladi. I'm the conference minister of the Connecticut Conference of the United Church of Christ, and we want to thank you for joining us for this Friday afternoon webinar. And my guest today is actually not my guest, it's my colleague, Pam Arifian, and we'll let her introduce herself to you in a moment. The title of this webinar is Acting on Faith, Climate Action in 2019. And today I'm going to speak with Pam about what the climate issues are of our day, how we might, as people of faith, respond to that, and what about the intersectionality on other issues of justice. And there is a chat window. If you're joining us by Zoom, you can send your question that way, and our moderator, Tiffany Vale, will get us those questions at the appropriate time. We'll take those at the end of the webinar if we have time. And if you're on Facebook Live and you want to ask a question in the comment section, you can do it that way as well. So we're really happy you've all joined us. Pam, would you say a word about yourself? Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, Kent, for hosting this conversation. And also thanks to Tiffany and Drew for doing the magic behind the scenes to make it smooth. I am also want to extend my gratitude to everybody who's viewing this either live or later. I think that this conversation is one of many conversations that we need to have on this topic. So thank you for your time and attention to this matter. So I am Pam Arifian. I'm the director of the United Church of Christ Northeast Environmental Justice Center. Through the Environmental Justice Center, we grow a movement of leaders who understand their role as stewards of the earth and who are helping to create a just, resilient, and sustainable future for everyone. The Environmental Justice Center focuses on transformative, justice-centered education and advocacy initiatives that empower individuals to be bold witnesses and leaders in their community.
That was a mouthful. Thank you, Pam. So we're gonna start our conversation, and we have about 30 minutes of time to have our conversation. We're gonna start our conversation with this thing called the Climate Report that was just released at the end of, towards the last quarter of last year. And we wanna talk a little bit about, for those of our audience, there may be people that know everything and have read the Climate Report from top to bottom, and there may be other people who have no idea what the contents of the Climate Report are. So would you give us just a quick overview of what the Climate Report is and what we discovered in this most recent release?
Sure. Well, there was actually two reports. One was from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the United Nations group that is writing these reports and analyzing the science. That report came out in October, and it examined the consequences of what would happen when we reach a global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which at this rate is, if we continue at the current rate, is going to happen by 2040. So we can probably distill all that whole report into climate change is here, it's happening right now, and it's happening a lot faster than anyone predicted. A key point of it was that we have about 12 years to take action, the action needed to shift from shift our everything to reduce and eliminate our greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the worst case scenarios. So use the word, there's no documented historical precedent for the thorough transformation that our society has to engage in order to avoid magnitudes of suffering. So that was the big takeaway from the UN report. A month later, the fourth National Climate Assessment came out from the US government, and that gave us the vision for what we can expect in the various regions in our country if we stay on the current course of emissions. Locally here, so of course we know about the wildfires and the droughts and the extreme superstorms that are devastating more and more people every year. Locally, that's going to look like, so here in the Northeast, in southern New England, we'll have milder winters, hotter temperatures in the summer, more extreme weather patterns or more extreme weather events. The sea level is going to rise a little bit higher in our area along our coastlines, and of course temperature, the sea temperature rise as well. So that's just a few of the little snippets of our Northeast region. But really, from the global perspective, here in the Northeast, we're not as vulnerable, generally speaking, from the major, from a lot of the major disruption happening as a result of the climate crisis, which doesn't let us off the hook.
So I last night read both reports over again.
Good for you.
And I was also at a meeting at a local church where we were talking about a variety of issues, and we were talking about the urgency of attending to those issues in the local church. And a retired pastor said, well, we've only got 12 years left. And people around the table were like, what on earth are you talking about? And he then went on to say just what you've quoted about the 12-year window that we have. And for many people, that seems so surreal and impossible, and it hits us at a gut emotional level. One of the things that I reacted to, Pam, when I read that report over again was the impact that has on us as people of faith, but also the impact it has on my children and my grandchildren. So I was thinking, this is something that we cannot ignore, and it is not something that we can necessarily look the other way about, like we do on lots of things to avoid pain and suffering. It seems to me this is an ever-present issue that we need to attend to. So I wanted to just get at sort of the emotional side of this, that we can read the facts, we can look at it, and it can hit us in such an overwhelming way that we throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing I can do. That's it. Do you have any response to that and your own emotional takeaway from these latest reports?
Yes, and thank you for that. So my personal takeaway from the reports, it wasn't necessarily new information for me. It still knocked the air out of me because knowing that what the worst case scenarios we were expecting in 2100 are going to be happening in 2040 when my daughter is 30 years old. It dropped me to my knees, truthfully. For those of us, for those who are working for social justice in general, and that encompasses economic justice and environmental justice, this sustained high level of emotion, of emotional reaction, it's hard to sustain. It's hard to manage that, and so often in our society that isn't centered in conversation. But I think it's really important to identify what those emotions were. For me, it was a deep grief, like a mourning, mourning that, what my daughter and, and future generations are going to have to take on because of our actions and for our inaction right now. For every year that goes by where we haven't made significant reductions in greenhouse gases, the inverse is going to happen in terms of suffering around the world, right? So the deep grief, the rage too. Like I have been angry about this because I'm turning 40 this year. The government and fossil fuel organizations and scientists have known that burning fossil fuels creates greenhouse gas emissions that contributes to global warming, which is contributing to global climate change. They've known about that since the year I was born. And so for my entire lifetime, we're still here where we're dealing with, folks who are denying the damage and, choosing to not look at the people who are suffering the most from this. and saddling our future generations with this burden. So yeah, there was that. There's definitely some guilt, because of course I still drive cars and I still, turn, whatever. I'm complicit in the system. And I'm doing my part, but there is that level of guilt as an emotional reaction as well, and anxiety also. There's more. I'm relieved to see more articles coming out about climate grief or eco anxiety, because it's real.
Yeah.
And I think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
That's okay. I think I was thinking about why it's such a such an acute emotional reaction, and it's because it challenges, I'll speak for myself, it challenges my values, the values that that I hold dear as a person of faith, as a citizen of this world, it foremost of which is justice and love and peace and unity, and the fact that we are here to be stewards of creation, that we are responsible for all of it. So, that challenge to my values is part of what creates that deep emotional response. And I think we need to talk about that.
So let's talk about that a little more. I do want to pick up on that. Our friend and colleague Jim Antal, who is known in UCC circles as one of the leaders in thought around addressing climate change, has written a wonderful book, and here it is. It's called Climate Change. That's our show and tell for this webinar. Climate Church, Climate World. If you have not gotten that book, run out, get it, download it. That's environmentally friendly, I think. And Jim's basic point, which has been his point for a very long time in listening and in learning from him, is that climate change is the moral challenge of our time, that it is the most significant moral issue that we need to address. And so he talks about the moral obligation for people of faith to attend to this. So what would you say about the moral challenge? Let me say one other thing about that from the faith perspective, that for Christians and for people of faith, the question of addressing this is one of stewardship, right? So if Scripture implores us to be good stewards, caretakers of the earth that God has given us, it's pretty clear that we have an obligation to this planet, to the future generations, and in essence, to be faithful to God's desire that we take care of things, that is the work of the church, is to remind the world that this is God's world. And we have to give it our affection, our care, and address the issues as people of faith. So do you have any comments, Pam, about sort of the moral challenge?
Yes, I do. So the scope of this change that needs to happen, right? So our society right now, our economy runs on fossil fuels. And for my lifetime, for your lifetime, that's all we've known. For several generations, that's what we've known. But human history is far, far older than that. But we've adapted to dependency on fossil fuels. And so to the mental shifts that needs to happen, and everything that needs to happen in order to staunch the bleeding, for example, if we want to use the triage image. If we need to stop the emissions, we need to stop using fossil fuels, and just the extenuating, like all the connections that it's just such a big problem and a big challenge. It's hard for our brains to wrap around it, and especially within the 12-year time frame, it's hard to imagine how we could possibly do it. And I think that's where people of faith are in a good spot, right? Because when you have I'm reminded of a video I saw recently of
Uh-huh.
a hillside with a bunch of trees, a forest, and there was a big windstorm happening, and you could see as the wind hit the trees, all the trees would move together. You could actually see the roots lifting the ground a little bit and coming back down as the wind subsided. If you think about one of those trees being all alone out there, it would have been toppled. But because of the interlocking roots, of the support that the trees gave each other, they were able to withstand it, at least as far as the video clip showed. So one of the things that is so important to me is this understanding of interdependence, which you know a thing or two about, is that we are all interconnected, and we are all, my action is connected to so many different things. And what people of faith, what faith helps me do is to help me deepen my sense of belonging in the world and belonging to each other, and recognizing and honoring that interdependence and our responsibility to care for one another. So I think I may have gotten off track there, but that's
okay. No, that was really an important point. I want to remind the people that are viewing this on Zoom or on Facebook Live that you can ask us some questions. We've got about 15 more minutes, and we want to leave space for those of you who might have questions. So you can put it in the comments section on Facebook or in the chat box on Zoom. Pam, you and I were on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think one more thing just to wrap up what I was saying before is that we have deeper pools of strength to face this challenge if we do it together, which is where the analogy of the trees came from. So that just wraps that one up. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you and I were on a call earlier this week that the national setting hosted, and Naomi Areski, who's a name everyone should know, was talking about sort of the question that I think lots of people are interested in, and that is this. What can I do as an individual? What are some of the things, you know, is it not drinking out of styrofoam cups? You know, are those such trivial matters that we shouldn't be attending to those? So I wonder if we could shift the focus a little bit, Pam, to things that, she said something really that struck me. She said that, you know, individuals can model the behavioral changes that we want to see. That we can show the way through the changes that we make in our lives that can then impact the broader, wider community. And she used the solar panels idea, right, of putting a solar panel on her house, and all of a sudden her neighbors coming over and asking her, well, of course they want to know, how much did that cost you? Why are you doing this? And that begins the conversations that we need to have, and that faith communities need to have, even internally, but also in the community, about things we can do. So I don't expect you to have the laundry list of the top 10 items that individuals can do, because there's plenty of those out there. Actually, there are lists of 50 and 100 that I found. But would you speak to sort of the issue of personal and then cultural and systemic change? What should we be thinking about in regards to climate change?
All of it, yes. Joanna Macy is a great teacher for me. She is an author, eco-philosopher, scholar of deep ecology, a Buddhist. She wrote the book with Chris Johnstone, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. And this book really, really helped me understand how the many tiers of action, the many dimensions of action. So she talks about how we are part of the great turning right now, from an extractive fossil fuel-based industrial growth model to a more life-sustaining one. And in order to do that, as an iterative process all the time, we need to start with gratitude always. We need to honor the pain and really process it and metabolize it so that we can see things with new eyes and then go forth. This is what she calls the spiral, the great turning. And the various dimensions of action include holding actions, life-sustaining systems and practices, and then a shift in consciousness. And all three—
Can you run those again? Because I
Sure.
think those are really critical. Could you say those slowly this time?
Yeah. So the first one, holding actions, and I'll read you what how they define it in the book. Holding actions are actions that hold back or slow down the damage being caused by business as usual. These actions, quote, defend our shared existence and the integrity of life on this, our planet home, end quote. So this means resisting the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, like natural gas pipelines that are are planned for and being constructed across our region, from the Algonquin pipeline to Access Northeast to power plants that are under construction or being planned. Cricket Valley Energy natural gas power plant right on the New York border of Connecticut is heavy on my mind, for example. And compressor stations going in, for example, in Weymouth, Massachusetts. Last year, I think it was last year, where a big natural gas pipeline exploded in Rhode Island. So it's affecting all of our regions. And there's lots of ways to get involved. Outside of our region, there are amazing coalitions of people resisting fossil fuel infrastructure around the world. Very front in my mind is the Wet'suwet'en tribe, who is trying to protect their lands at Unistoten in northern BC from several tar sands and natural gas pipelines that are trying to push through their territory. And just earlier this week, in an echo of what happened at Standing Rock here several years ago, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police breached their gate, their barrier, and arrested peaceful, unarmed land and water protectors. So that's that's front in my mind right now, along with Line 3 in Minnesota, Honor the Earth, and Winona LaDuke are really at the forefront of that.
So individuals can find a way to get involved in these actions. We're going to give lots of information to people. So that's the first thing Macy talks about. What's the second thing?
Okay. Thanks for keeping me on track. Because I could go on, and you know that.
The second point Macy makes?
Yeah. Well, so I have a monthly environmental justice newsletter that I am listing these things and giving updates on actions all the time. So that's a great way to stay informed. They're monthly-ish. You can sign up at maybe Tiffany can send the link in the chat box there.
Sure.
Anyway, so the next one, so that's holding actions, resisting fossil fuel infrastructure, defending life. The next dimension is life-sustaining practices, and these are systems and practices that replace or transform the systems that are causing the harm into the systems that heal, that are regenerative, that support a more resilient, just, and sustainable world for everyone. So this is where it really gets personal. This is looking at the choices we make every day, about how we travel, how we shop, what we eat, where it comes from, how it's grown, how we use energy and what that energy is, all of those things. I do a really effective exercise with youth a lot here at Silver Lake Conference Center in the summertime, and in creation care workshops, the example of a food map. We create a food map together where we choose a favorite food, and then we create a map of all the resources and inputs and impacts that resulted in bringing it to our table. And in that way, we're able to make the connection, to connect the dots between my decision and environmental justice and social justice issues around the world.
Great.
And so
yeah.
making those connections, and then taking action to reduce. The best thing you could do, the most impactful thing that one person can do, is eat less meat. I know a lot of people aren't going to like hearing that, but yeah.
Speak the truth. Speak the truth. And the third point that Macy talks about.
Yes. I'm sorry, but before we move away from life-sustaining practices, I do also want to say, so it's personal choices and also working in the community to create the supports for those who aren't able to do as much with the resources available to them. So food pantries, community resilience projects, like restoring wetlands and wild places. League of Conservation Voters, CHISPA program is working on clean bus initiative. So all these various things that support that transformation in your personal life and in your communities. That's the life-sustaining practices. This also means going all in on clean energy policies. All in. Mark Jacobson is a Stanford University professor who proved that each of the 50 states and virtually every country in the world could transition to 100% renewable energy by the year 2050, and the only thing stopping us is the will to commit to it. So get out there and make sure your legislators know that you mean business about clean energy. Also, as part of the life-sustaining practices is centering the people who have been most marginalized. For example, youth who are going to suffer disproportionate burden of the climate crisis, indigenous groups who have historically suffered an enormous amount of trauma, and now too with the extraction, transport, and burning of fossil fuels, and centering those marginalized voices who are already doing really great things on a grassroots community level. Climate Justice Alliance is a great organization working with those frontline communities, so that's something to follow.
Great.
So moving on from life sustaining is the shift in consciousness, which is what we were talking about before, is that deepening our sense of belonging to the world. And top on that list is get outside, connect with nature, remember your love for nature, remember the sacredness in nature, and connect with our humanity in that way. I think also the honoring the pain part is part of this shift in consciousness, because if we keep stuffing the hard feelings, we're not really going to metabolize that energy very well. Thanks, Tiffany, for posting the Climate Justice Alliance. So yeah, shifting consciousness.
Those are three really good frameworks to attend to, and there's so much material in there. I wanted to wrap us up because we've got about 3 minutes left. I wanted to wrap us up, first of all, by saying thank you, Pam, for your time, and we'll close with the last sort of reflection. And there, I think, is a need for us to have future conversations. So if those of you are watching want to see other webinars along this piece, we could hone in on one of the items that Pam has named and spend a little more deliberative time on those. I apologize that we're not giving people a chance to ask questions, but on the next webinar we will. So my last and final question for you is, one of the things that I think is really important that was said by Naomi Oreskes the other day was, if we do the right thing, your heart will come along. And it strikes me that there is an intersectionality in the work of working for justice, that climate justice is connected to racism, is connected to the other isms of our country and our world, and that everything is in fact interconnected. So do you have any sort of closing thoughts about intersectionality that you could offer to our viewers today?
In less than 2 minutes. Yeah. So because of the interconnectedness of all the problems, the solutions are also, climate change, it intersects with, perpetuates, exacerbates all of it. Those who are most marginalized are already and will continue to be impacted the worst, or more disproportionately so. For example, with rising temperatures, our urban communities and the heat island effect are going to be, so, you know, excessive heat is really dangerous for people with respiratory illness, for example. In our urban communities, especially in low income and in communities of color, that's where a majority of our polluting industries are. So for example, the trash that is generated here at Silver Lake Conference Center in Sharon, Connecticut is trucked with the trash from 70 other towns to Hartford to be burned in incinerators, and the pollution settles in the lungs of those communities who look a lot different than here in Sharon, right? A much higher majority of people of color there. And so asthma rates are higher there. So more heat in these communities is going to have a greater impact. And then of course you think of the storms that come through. Hurricane Maria is a great example of the disproportionate response to disasters as a result of the climate crisis. So that's just a little, I mean, I could go on about that.
But those are two really concrete examples. Really we can get our head around those as the intersectionality piece that those of us who are engaged in various justice work recognize that all these things have connections and are interwoven and with each other. So I want to thank you, Pam, for your time today. Pam is an enthusiastic proponent and climate justice and climate person and someone said you're the best, whoever Diane is.
That's my mother-in-law. Thanks, Diane.
Nice, mother-in-law. We got the mother-in-law comment. And so we are grateful to you, Pam, for your enthusiasm and the knowledge that you have, and recognizing that a half an hour can't really capture it all. But this is a foray and an entree into trying to get the word out about some of the work that you do collaboratively with lots of partners, and how we all have a responsibility as people of faith to not turn our heads the other way, but in fact to attend to this, to preach about it, to get involved. And those 3 points that Joanna Macy makes, I think are really good. There's the book, Active Hope. So thank you all for joining us by Zoom and by Facebook Live. This will be archived, so you can watch it again, and look for another webinar in the future, and we'll continue this conversation. Thanks to Tiffany Vale for providing the behind the scenes work. We depend on her for lots of good things, so thank you very much, Tiffany. And once again, thank you all who have joined us, and please look at the links, sign up for things, and we are grateful for this chance to come to you today by the miracle of technology. Blessings to all. Godspeed.
Thank you.